All right. Hey, welcome back here. Last time in our lecture series, we were talking about um, the rise of, I shouldn't say the rise of conservation. We talked about the very beginning of conservation. Okay. We actually talked about a lot of exploitation throughout history. And then we'd ended with the founding of Yellowstone National Park. And really, that era symbolizes kind of our first step towards um, as our country as a conservation as a um, national requirement's not the right word, national focus, a national agenda item, priority, those kind of things. You guys are busy researching your own national parks. There's I'm not going to be able to name how many there are right now. There may be around 70. Gosh, I want to say upper 50s, maybe even to 70. They've added some. It depends on how you classify them, but there's a ton of national parks out there. You can see many are to the west. That is mainly due in part to just that is where we have settled the latest, and so it's easier to preserve some of those spots. And I grew up in the great state of Iowa. If you'll notice, there's no national parks in Iowa. That's because it's more profitable for us to farm Iowa instead. All right, that is, if you've ever driven through Iowa, it is cornfields. All right, over 99% of the state is just cornfields as they're going. So anyway, national parks are prevalent. They're only one part of the picture, though. So you look at this map, and we have in green highlights of the national parks. If you've ever been to a national park, there are some very strict rules about what you can and can't do with our goals of making them pristine. We'll talk about why when we get to the founder of the national parks. But there are other public lands out there. So if we look at this, here is a look at protected federal lands, and so the dark green would include, I believe, some national forest land, some other things like that, and then the light green probably includes some BLM lab, and land, and we'll talk about why that is. But if you notice in this map, there are a ton of public lands out there, and that's one of the great things about our country is this public land system that sometimes people want to try to take public lands away, where these are all lands that any American can go and use and um, get the joy and the benefit of nature there. So if we looked at that broken down by each state, here's the percent of land that the federal government owns, meaning it's a public entity there. Um, Once again, shout out to Iowa. If you look, only 0.8% is public lands in Iowa. The rest is privately owned. Um, Interesting story. Most of it's not by Iowans, it's investment companies. But if you look out west, huge chunks of the west are public lands. So those are um, lands for us to use, to, like I said, get out and enjoy nature for as we are living our lives. So, kind of with that, we're going to get into a couple of agencies today, a couple of big laws that have impacted conservation. Just kind of getting some basics on, once again, kind of the world we live in now and how that um, came to be. While the Yellowstone National Park was founded a long time ago, 1916 was the founding of of the National Park Service. That was the website that we used to research our um, other national parks that are found. Enacted in 1916, so it's been around for over 100 years now. And that is the federal agency responsible for the care of the national parks. So the federal government is the steward to those national parks in order to make sure that, one, they are remaining pristine, but also two, that as many people that can, use them as possible without degrading them are able to do so each year. So there are millions of people flock to the national parks every year and take advantage of that system. Um, that was a National Park Service, kind of going in chronological order here. We had a Lacey Act shortly after that. What that does is it regulates the shipment of illegally killed animals or poaching. So it made it illegal to trade protective wildlife. While we all want to protect wildlife and have conservation, without any federal laws to back that up, there's not really any teeth in making sure that our wildlife doesn't um, disappear. The Lacey Act was one of the first ones to help provide some of that traction for the nation to protect our wildlife there. Shortly after that, we had the Migratory Bird Conservation Act. It's one of the first steps in protecting migratory birds. So think pheasants, think mainly, I shouldn't say pheasants, mainly waterfowl, so ducks. Duck hunting is obviously still um, a huge part of a lot of American culture, and we wanted to make sure that that stuck around for a long time. This came with one of the first, I don't want to call it a license, but you had to get a um, stamp if you're planning on hunting um, migratory birds. If you look at the picture on the right, I can't tell what year that is. I think it's 1930 something, but $1. So if you were gonna go duck hunting, you're gonna have to pay $1 in order for the right to go duck hunting. Nowadays, it's more than $1, but it's very reasonable. I would say a duck stamp is less than $50, I think. What that does is that money goes directly back into conserving wetlands, conserving wild spaces, to make sure that ducks will always have a place to live. So in that way, it's a cool system where the people that want to harvest the ducks are directly fundraising, making sure that their habitat is secure. That's raised over $1 billion to date now. Pittman Robertson Act. This one, you're gonna have a chance to do some research on this one. This has actually been in the news a lot recently because they're trying to get rid of it. What the Pittman Robertson Act does is it raises money in the form of taxes on hunting equipment and ammunition. And same concept here is that there's an extra tax on ammunition and on hunting equipment that goes directly towards conservation of natural resources. So as you're going and buying your deer hunting equipment, there's a tax on there so that some of that money is going to the programs that are making sure there are deer out there for us to hunt. And so if you think about it, that is it's a very beneficial program that we've had for no, almost 90 years now of helping fund a lot of our conservation acts in there. Moving on, maybe one that you've maybe heard of before, and that's the Endangered Species Act in the 1970s. So a decent time jump later. We were busy, fighting a world war in there and heading to Korea and all those things. So Endangered Species Act comes around 1973. It identifies and manages rare, threatened, and endangered species. Um, this is common sense to us now because we've grown up with the idea of endangered animals or extinct animals. At the time, it was just we wanted to make sure that we're protecting things, but there wasn't any kind of a agency or service that was actually tracking like population sizes and those kinds of things in order to make sure we had healthy populations. It also gives some legal teeth behind being able to protect those endangered populations as well. Ending today with a few different agencies. So moving on from our laws, one is the Wildlife Refuge System. There's a couple spots of those along the Mississippi River. What it is a system of wildlife refuges across the United States. It is a branch of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It was founded in 1966. It manages a large number of lands. They're for public use for the most part. But once again, just establishing natural ecosystems within our civilization in order to make sure that there's a spot for fish and wildlife as well in our society. The Forest Service, we're going to be getting into a lot of depth on the Forest Service. The Forest Service is huge. I'm not going to be able to think of the percentage right now, but it's part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it manages 191 million acres. That is a massive amount of land. A good chunk of public land in the United States is managed by the Forest Service. The Forest Service is going to be a little different than national parks because Forest Service will still go through and they'll still log. They'll allow fishing and hunting and those kind of things in their lands. So it's a lot more using the natural resources rather than preserving them there. And then we're going to end here with one that maybe is uh, the least common to us here in the Midwest. People in the western part of the country are very familiar with the Bureau of Land Management, or the BLM. It is, once again, a huge chunk of the United States right here. Roughly 1/8 of the land in the United States is under BLM management. It is like I said, it's an agency, and they're trying to sustain the health, diversity, and the productivity of public lands to make sure that they're there for future generations. Now, this is still, if you want to, graze your cattle on BLM lands, you're more than welcome to, but they are just lands that stay in the public ownership to make sure that they're there for years to come. Okay, so those agencies help shape this picture of, who owns the different lands within the United States there, and a little bit more about how we've gone from an era of exploitation to now an active era of conserving our national resources.